A dying man whispered a name no one recognized, and hours later, a full-grown lion was standing outside his window. The nurses thought it was just another confused whisper from a dying man. But when Caleb Turner said that name again, something in the room shifted. Outside, beyond the frozen field, a lion stood perfectly still, watching, waiting, as if it had heard him from miles away. By the time the morning light reached the windows of the care home, it had already lost its warmth. It came in thin and pale, sliding across the floorboards like something too tired to stay. Caleb Turner lay near that weak light with his eyes half closed, listening to the old building breathe around him. The walls creaked, a kettle hissed somewhere down the hall. A cart rolled past his door, then faded. Everything in the place seemed to move softly, as if sound itself had learned to be gentle around dying men. Caleb had once lived where wind came hard off the ridges and dust settled in the seams of a man's hands. He had spent years in open country, walking fence lines, reading weather in the trees, sleeping beneath skies so wide they made a man feel honest. Now his world had narrowed to a narrow bed, a wooden nightstand, and one window facing the wild edge of the property. He did not complain. Men like Caleb rarely did. But there was a silence in him that had grown heavier with each passing week, a silence shaped like all the things he had buried and never named. Lena Brooks noticed it every morning. She was the first one in his room that day, carrying medicine in a paper cup, and the kind of tired kindness that could not be taught in school. She was 42, steady-handed, plain-spoken, and careful not to pity people. Caleb respected that. She adjusted his blanket, checked the machine beside him, and asked if he wanted the curtain open wider. "Leave it," he murmured. She nodded and turned toward the window anyway, only because something outside had caught her eye. At first she thought it was a shadow between the cottonwoods beyond the fence. Then the shape moved. It was large. Too large for a stray dog, too still for a deer. It stood at the edge of the frost-burned field with its head lifted toward the building, golden brown against the washed-out morning. Even from that distance, there was something unmistakable in the posture, something powerful, held under control. Lena felt her breath catch. By the time she stepped out into the hallway, 2 orderlies had already seen it from the side entrance. Someone whispered the word, lion, as if saying it too loudly might make it real. No one laughed. No one dismissed it. The animal remained where it was, not pacing, not prowling, not showing its teeth. It simply stood there in the cold, looking toward the home as though it had come for a reason and had no intention of leaving without it. Inside room 7, Caleb opened his eyes a little wider. There it was again. A sound so low most people would have missed it. Not a roar. Not even a call, really. More like a rough breath dragged through a memory. It came through the glass, through the winter air, through years Caleb had tried not to revisit. Something deep in his chest tightened, not with fear, but with recognition so sudden it almost hurt. Lena returned to find him staring toward the window. "Mr. Turner," she said gently, "there's an animal outside. We're handling it." But Caleb barely seemed to hear her. His face had changed. Not much. Just enough for the years to fall back from it. He swallowed once, slowly, and turned his eyes toward the fading line of woods beyond the field. Then, in a voice dry as old cedar and soft with disbelief, he whispered, "That can't be Ridge." Lena did not answer him right away. She followed his gaze to the window, to the far fence line where the great animal still stood, quiet as a thought that had waited years to be heard. Caleb's lips parted slightly, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw something stronger than pain move through his face. It was not shock. It was the look of a man hearing his own past step out of the dark. He asked for water. After a sip, he kept staring outside. "I found him in a burn scar," he said at last. The words came slowly, but once they began, they carried their own weather with them. It had been many summers ago, back when Caleb still worked long stretches of land, where drought turned hills the color of bone. A lightning storm had rolled through the high country one evening, and by dawn the ridges were burning. He had gone in with a small crew to check the perimeter after the worst of it passed. The ground was black and soft under his boots, the air bitter with ash, and every tree seemed to hold the shape of something it used to be. That was when he heard a scraping noise under a fallen limb. Not loud, not desperate, just stubborn. He moved the branch and found a cub pinned beneath it, thin and smoke-streaked, its coat dulled by soot, its eyes too fierce for something so small. Caleb said the little thing did not cry when he reached down. It looked straight at him, shaking but unbroken, as if choosing, in that terrible place, to trust one last thing. "I should have called it in and walked away," he murmured. "That would have been the clean way." But he had not walked away. He carried the cub under his jacket to keep it warm. He fed it from a rubber bottle in the tool shed behind his cabin. At night, when wind pressed against the boards and sleep would not come, the cub curled near the stove and watched him with wide, sleepless eyes. Caleb never meant to keep him long. He told himself that every day. Yet the creature began to follow him from room to room, then from porch to yard, then to the edge of the trees and back again. It was not obedience, it was attachment, plain and dangerous, and real. For weeks he refused to name him. Then, one evening, standing together on the high ridge above the canyon, the young lion lifted his face into the wind, as though he belonged to the whole wild world at once. Caleb looked at him and said, "Ridge." After that, it got harder. The lion grew. So did the bond Caleb had no business allowing. On the nights when grief came for him hardest, grief for a wife gone too early, for years turned cold and wordless, Ridge would lie near the porch steps and remain there until morning. No noise, no demand, just presence. Caleb had spent half his life thinking strength meant enduring pain alone. That animal taught him otherwise without ever asking to. So when the time came, Caleb drove Ridge to a protected reserve and signed the papers with a hand that did not feel like his own. He did not go back. Not once. Because some part of him knew that if he saw those eyes again, he might choose love over sense. And men his age were taught not to trust what could break them open. At the window, the shape beyond the fence had not moved. Lena stood very still beside the bed. "You really think that's him?" Caleb's throat worked as he looked out into the whitening field. Then he said, almost to himself, "If Ridge came back now, then something in him knew I was running out of time." Lena did not tell the others what Caleb had said, not at first. She stepped into the hallway and found the morning already tightening into fear. One aide wanted animal control. Another kept insisting the lion would bolt if they made enough noise. The administrator, pale and irritated, spoke in clipped sentences about liability, locked doors, and the kind of disaster that ruins lives in a single afternoon. Through all of it, the animal remained beyond the fence, still as weathered stone, his gaze fixed on the building with a patience that unnerved everyone more than violence would have. By noon, the field had turned silver under a hard winter sky. Ridge had not left. Inside the room, Caleb seemed to be fading and sharpening at the same time. His hands were weaker, but his eyes held an old steadiness now, as if something long buried had risen to the surface and refused to sink again. He asked Lena to raise the bed a little. Then he listened. "You hear him?" he asked. Lena almost said no. What she heard was only wind brushing the siding and the muffled tension of frightened staff. But Caleb was not listening with his ears alone. He was turned toward that fence line the way a man turns toward a voice he has carried inside himself for years. Late in the afternoon, the lion moved. Not toward the main entrance, not toward the road. He circled slowly along the outer edge of the property until he reached the old service gate near the south wing, the one that opened toward the tree line and the disused therapy garden. There he stopped and waited. Lena went to the back window and watched him standing beside the locked gate, neither pacing nor testing it, just waiting at the exact place where the shortest path led to Caleb's room. Something in her chest gave way. She had lived long enough with loss to recognize its shape in others. Years ago, after the death of her son, people had filled her house with casseroles and soft voices, then gone home to their own lives. What stayed with her was not what they said. It was the one old friend who sat on her porch for 3 hours and said almost nothing at all. Presence, she had learned then, could be holier than comfort. When she returned to Caleb, he was looking at the door instead of the window. "You don't have much time," she said quietly. "No," he answered, "and if I do this, I may lose my job." Caleb turned his face toward her, worn and honest, and far too tired for persuasion. "Then don't do it for me." Lena stood there for a long moment, feeling the whole careful machinery of rules press against the softer, older truth inside her. Then she picked up the phone and called the administrator, not to ask permission, but to tell her what was about to happen. Security was posted at the far hall. The south wing was cleared. The service gate was opened. Every voice in the building dropped, as if the walls themselves understood they were nearing some fragile edge. At dusk, Lena unlocked Caleb's door and left it open. Cold air slid in first, touched with pine and earth, and the iron smell of winter. Then came the sound of measured paws along the corridor floor, heavy, deliberate, unhurried. Staff members stood back without speaking. No one reached for a radio. No one made a sound that might disturb the gravity of what they were witnessing. Ridge appeared in the doorway like something remembered from a dream too powerful to fade. He did not rush forward. He stopped at the threshold, broad head lifted, amber eyes fixed on the man in the bed. For one suspended second, neither moved. The room seemed to empty of everything except breath, distance, and recognition. Caleb's fingers trembled on the blanket as he gathered what little strength remained and lifted his hand. Ridge saw it, and only then did the lion step inside. The last few feet between them felt longer than all the vanished years. Ridge crossed the room with a care so unnatural it left everyone rooted where they stood. He was no longer the smoke-streaked cub Caleb had carried out of a ruined hillside, nor the young lion that once shadowed him along the porch at dusk. He was all muscle now, all power and winter light. And yet he moved as if afraid the wrong step might break the fragile thread still holding the old man to the world. At the bedside, he stopped again, waiting. Caleb's hand remained lifted, unsteady in the thin air of the room. For a moment, the lion only looked at it. Then Ridge lowered his great head and pressed it beneath that trembling palm. The change in Caleb's face was so small, no one would have noticed it, unless they were already watching for miracles. The strain in his brow eased. The hard line around his mouth loosened. His fingers, bent by weakness, found their place in the thick fur above Ridge's eyes and stayed there, not gripping, not clinging, simply resting as though they had returned to something that had always belonged to them. "You didn't forget," Caleb whispered. Ridge answered with a sound too deep to be called a purr and too soft to be called anything else. It moved through the bed frame, through the floor, through the stillness gathered in every corner of the room. Lena felt it in her chest. No one behind her spoke. The administrator, the aides, the guard at the door, every one of them seemed to understand that language had become unnecessary. The lion did not climb onto the bed. He did not crowd the frail body before him. Instead, he folded himself onto the floor beside Caleb, lowering his weight in stages until his shoulder rested near the bedside, and his head lay close to the blanket. Only then, after Caleb's hand drifted downward, did Ridge lean in and let the old man's wrist settle against his mane. Outside, evening thinned into blue. The windows held the last of the day like fading ice. Caleb's breathing grew quieter. He looked once toward Lena, and there was gratitude in his eyes, but no fear. She stepped back on instinct, giving the room over to the two souls who had earned it. Years from now, she would remember not the lion's size, nor the danger everyone had whispered about, but the gentleness. That was what undid her. The gentleness of something strong enough to destroy, choosing only to stay. Caleb turned his face slightly toward Ridge. "You came a long way," he murmured. The lion lifted his eyes. "I'm tired now." Those were the last clear words he spoke. After that, the room seemed to pass into another kind of time, one measured not by clocks or monitors, but by breath. In, out. Then softer. Then longer between each one. Ridge did not move. He watched Caleb with the solemn attention of the living keeping faith with the dying. Once, he touched his nose lightly to the edge of the blanket near Caleb's ribs, as if listening for the heart beneath it. Then the breathing stopped. No machine cried out. No one rushed forward. Even the old building seemed to hold itself still. What followed left everyone in total silence. Ridge raised his head slowly and looked at Caleb for a long moment that no one in the room would ever be able to measure. He did not paw at him. He did not make a sound. He only remained there, eyes open, keeping watch, as though he understood that love, at the very end, is sometimes nothing more and nothing less than refusing to leave first. Lena covered her mouth with both hands. The administrator lowered her gaze. One of the aides began to cry without meaning to. Yet no one stepped in. No one had the heart to interrupt the hush that had fallen over the room like a blessing. At last, Ridge stood, turned once toward the darkening window, then looked back at the bed. He touched his forehead gently to Caleb's hand, holding there for a breath, perhaps two. After that, he walked out the way he had come, through the open door, down the quiet corridor, and into the deepening blue of evening beyond the south gate. In the days that followed, staff sometimes saw him at the far edge of the property near the line of trees, lying where he could face Caleb's window. He never caused trouble, never came too close. He only returned at dusk and stayed until the light was gone, like a keeper of something the rest of them had nearly forgotten how to name. Lena understood it a little better each time she saw him. Some bonds are not broken by distance, some are not broken by time, and some do not end even when one heart does. She stood by the window on the last evening Ridge appeared and watched him rise and disappear into the darkening woods, carrying that silence back into the wild. Some bonds don't break. They simply wait for us to remember them. Caleb and the lion remind us that love, once given, never truly disappears. If this story stayed with you, leave a simple 1 in the comments. Like and subscribe to follow more stories that speak quietly, but stay with you long after they end.